Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everybody. If you please take a seat and that we pay attention. I'm Alexandra, BENSAID. I'm a journalist at France Inter, and I'm very happy to very honored to animate this roundtable, which is called From Billions to Trillions, Billions to Thousands of Billions, Finance the Transition in the South. So just in a nutshell, just why is this roundtable of great importance, a big issue for us? Well, the problem of funding the Souths is also our problem. First of all, greenhouse emissions have no borders, so the emissions is a global issue, and the problem of financing the Souths with an S. It's a concern to us because it's a question that can only be solved with money calculating according to our climatic debt. It's a historical issue. When we talk about the COPs, for example, in Baku, we promised to developing countries, when I say we, developed countries promised 300 billion per year. Before that, we were barely reached 100 billion per year. And the step seems to be much higher than 300 billion per year. And the problem of South countries is they have a complicated equation. Some of them don't have access to the financial sector to finance their tradition, and they have to finance their development at the same time. So that's the complicated equation. And the problem of financing in billions, tens, and trillions, it's our problem also because we're faced with the same issue. Look at our prime rénov in France, something very much discussed right now in France. We know that when we finance in the envelope rehabilitation, housing rehabilitation, it has just been suspended because there is some fraud, of course, yes, true, but also the envelope couldn't have covered all the needs this year. It's expensive. You have to finance that transition. It's expensive. And then also we have to find finance defense, our education. We're preparing the budget. What will we include in the transition budget? Same problem, financing transition. And those who don't want to finance, some people think, and this is really in the news, remember the discussion inside the government you've heard between the Minister of Interior, who says we have to stop financing wind turbines, EMRs, and a minister that we have who said it's totally responsible to say that. So who should finance, at what level, to do what, the South, the North? And I also talk about the elephant in the room. There is a backlash on ecological policies. The great initiator of the backlash, his name is Donald Trump, and it's unfortunate because he's a great funder, potentially. The U.S. is a great country, but it's a major polluter also, and the backlash is really bad. So South-North, are we in a dead end? Are we condemned to inaction, to raising taxes? We have solutions to finance. Do we have solutions to finance the fight against the climate warming? So this roundtable will cover all these issues, particular focus on the southern countries. And around me, there's a wonderful panel. There is, first of all, Monsieur le Président, Mr. President, former President of Costa Rica, ALVARADO QUESADA. And I thank him for being with us. Sitting next to him, Monsieur OTORBAEV, Djoomart, former Prime Minister of Kyrgyzstan Republic, a Kyrgyz Republic, Central Asia. So thank you for being with us. The Minister of Ecological Transition in France, Mrs. Minister Agnès PANNIER-RUNACHER, good day to you. Thank you for being with us. And sitting next to me, Mr. Zhang. Mr. Zhang, representative of the Asian representation of the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS. It's the bank of central banks. They monitor financial flows, the piping, in fact, where the money goes to finance what. Merci d'être avec nous in French. Thank you for being with us. And the person who organized this room, Helene, she's an economist, a member of the Cercle des économistes. I'd just like to say that, how long do we have before us? I think we have 50 minutes. there will be a question for the Q&A, time for the Q&A. But first of all, we'll start with Helene, who will sort of set the frame for this round table. Mrs. Helene. Can we change Helen's microphone? I think it's not operational. There you go. You can use that one. Thank you. So good morning, everybody. So obviously it's an honor for me to introduce this round table on one of the most urgent challenges of the time, ecological transition in the global south and its financing. So from billions to trillions, the expression, well, was used in 2015. It's Bertrand Vadré who introduced it in a report of the World Bank. Bertrand Vadré is here next with us. He's animating other sessions. So the problem is not recent. You know, we're talking 2015. It's an issue, a problem that has been with us for a long time, but it's also a global problem, as Alexandra said. And in fact, something that, of course, developed economies are always key for the fight against climate change, but it's now emerging countries and developing countries that are, who produce 2/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, and it's also emerging and developing countries who have an extremely rich biodiversity and nature. So it's obviously in these countries that climate change has the strongest impact, and where the fight against climate change has an impact. So if we think of the biggest emitters, 2 are from the global south, China and India, and 2 which are advanced countries or regions, the US and EU. So the countries of the global south must rapidly have a development strategy that is low carbon, and also develop ways of preserving the biodiversity and nature. And all this despite a capital cost that is very high, much higher than in advanced countries. And so that's really at the heart of the problem. The countries of the south, global south, have a financial deficit that is colossal. We need 2,000 billion per year up to until 2030 to finance climate change and sustainable development, the ecological transition, and we're very far from that. We're very from the 1.5 degree limit of the Paris Agreement. We're on paths that are heading towards 3 degrees in terms of climate warming. And so we have to be able to finance the mitigation. That is, the mitigation is the fact of trying not to emit more greenhouse gases, and also adaptation, how we adapt when we have a climate crisis, when the climate is warmer and warmer, increasingly warm. And we'll talk about Kyrgyzstan, or the Kyrgyz Republic, a country that has glaciers. We had they're disappearing. It's a drama in countries where you have a lot of hydroelectricity. In Costa Rica, there are climate change, temperature changes that are dramatic for the coffee crops. It's really serious issues, serious problems on a day-to-day basis. So for this panel, I propose that we really have an important mission ahead of us, and that is to try to fight together against climate change. And I think a lot of people are interested in that, and particularly the youth in this room, and we need to find solutions. So I will how do we really strike hard to improve things? What priorities should we tackle to try to change things at a larger scale? So 3 examples I'd like to propose of major projects for mitigation. In my opinion, one is pulling out of coal. And for a lot of emerging economies, well, it's a problem. Like India has a very rapid growth. Emissions are on the rise, and a large part of their energy is produced with coal. very carbon-intensive fuel. And India is trying to pull out and be a good thing for the world. The second mitigation project is preserving the Amazon. How can we preserve biodiversity and trees in the Amazon region? We can learn a lot from Costa Rica to that effect, and maybe extend that to the carbon credit markets, etc. And the third example of a major mitigation project is developing solar energy in Africa. Why is the African continent, where there's a lot of sun energy, why isn't more covered by solar panels, and why can't solar energy be exported towards European countries through their production? Who will do the investments? And we have a lot of things to do to adapt. I mentioned the Kyrgyz Republic, and also in France, a lot of adaptation project. All the economic studies that are focused on the cost of climate change are faced with costs that are much higher than we thought. That is, if we do adaptation work, if we invest in adaptation, it will be good even for the public accounts. Because if we don't invest in adaptation, well, we're going to be paying very high costs as a punishment in a way. So even for public finances, we need to think of adaptation. And for the large country and the coalition of the large countries, mitigation is also a serious option to lower the cost of finance, of public finance. What can we do? There are some options. To talk about the Paris report, which is from the CPR in Bruegel. It's just been published. It's called Public Action Without Global Governance. It gives a certain number of ideas, like a coalition of countries to finance ecological transition in emerging countries. Hybrid financing will probably address this with the BRI, the IRB. We can use multinational results to try to really follow the capitals, like carbon credit markets, and eventually the markets to clean up the carbon which can be created, technological transfers, a lot of things that we can do concretely. And now I'll let the panel tell us and give us their examples, and I hope we pull out of this session in a very constructive and optimist way. Thank you, Ella.
Thank you. Perfect transition. We will now give the floor to President Alvarado. Could you please tell us about, Costa Rica is a pioneer country. Is it possible to finance the transition? To do what? With what money? I believe that you've done quite well. Thank you. Yes, hello. I'm very happy to be here. Unfortunately, I'm going to be speaking in English. I apologize, but I can express myself better in English.
Our own development related to the environment, there have been several stages and several learnings. Last century, at the beginning of last century, Costa Rica was 80% forest. 80%, 80 forest of our country. But by 1980, we were only 20% forest. We had devastated most of it, mostly for productive activities and in agriculture. Back then, starting in the 1970s, scientists, politicians thought it was important to preserve some ecosystems. Costa Rica is a petit morceau of land, but it has 6% of the planet's biodiversity. It's a jewel of biodiversity. And we were losing that, not only Costa Ricans, but whole humanity. So the first generation of policies to finance it was the creation of the national park system. So starting with the 70s, we created national parks across the country to preserve that nature. Back then, people said, you're going to destroy the economy, that is worthless, that is bad for the country. But it was completely the opposite. The national park system not only preserved nature, but created new industries, clean industries. One of the main industries of our country is ecotourism. So that first generation of conservation created wealth, grew the country and benefit. And how was it paid? It was paid by the taxpayer. The country got debt, and through taxes, it's been paid. It's also fair to say it's very expensive. We're still paying that to this day, and it's a burden. But it created growth, and it created well-being across the country. But there were other problems, environmental problems, because you have landlocked pieces of land, but genetic diversity could not express. There were not natural corridors. So in the 90s, the second generation of policies was what's called the payment for environmental services. This is a scheme in which private owners of forest are paid for the services the forests give society. Remember, this is the 1990s. People thought they were crazy, they were smoking pot, they were high, because nobody believed back then that this was something to pay for, that was to put a monetary value in it. But it happened. We created the payment of environmental services, the first in the planet, and to this day, owners of private forests are paid $57 a hectare for conservation and protection, reforestation, several schemes. How was this paid? This was paid with the technical support of Norway. Aid is key. It was paid through loans with the World Bank and the German Reconstruction Bank, but also, and most importantly, with a tax on fossil fuels. So fossil fuels were taxed, and that tax goes to the forest. And let's say that's the second generation of policies. Nowadays, I mentioned Costa Rica was in 80% forest coverage at the beginning of last century. 1980, 20% of forest coverage. Nowadays, because of those public policies, our forest coverage is of 55%. And we're growing. Not only coverage, economically. So that's a counterexample that you can fund this and benefit the country and the planet. Lastly, the first generation of policies, new and most recently, after a Paris Agreement in 2015, all countries were to do the NDCs and their programs of transformation. But by 2019, no country had presented it. So Costa Rica, under my administration, presented the first decarbonization plan of the planet, the first one of the planet to disengage emissions from growth and well-being. Back then, people said again, it's impossible, that's not going to work, and who's going to fund this? But we did it. Innovation pays off, because when we did it, and as it was the first plan, we have partners from all across the world willing to finance it. One being the French Agency for Development, one within many. And they started to support the plan. The eventual technical plan of this decarbonization plan yielded $50 billion in net utility. That means that the plan was not a cost, was an investment, and still keeps driving growth. So, just to close on this, there's been a pathway of new generations of how to invest on it, but two main ideas. One, innovation and courage pays off. And two, we have to take off outside of our minds that these are costs and sink costs. This is investment. The thing we need to figure out is the balance to invest in things both publicly and privately to generate those benefits. And that is possible, and that is being demonstrated through these experiences and through these economic studies. And we can see that now in industrial policy. The Inflation Reduction Act in the United States is industrial policy not only to tackle climate change, but to own the industries of the future. Similar with France, similar with the EU with the Green Deal. So I think we need to move into that direction and see it as investment.
Thank you. On démarre avec de l'espoir. We start. OTORBAEV. So do you see the things the same way? You live in you come from Kyrgyzstan. You have a low carbon print. You have jewels, which are glaciers. And do you think you can disengage emissions from growth and how to finance this transition?
Thank you very much, and I really pleasure to be part of this outstanding session. And it's a very successful conference. What I heard that more than 1 million people watching and listening what we are saying. This gives us a lot of responsibility to give real sense principles and ideas. Are we able, as part of the Global South, to finance green transition? I cannot say for all Global South. For instance, I know not too much about Africa or Latin America. I can say a little bit about Asia, where we are located. And as many of you know, Asia is doing very well in economic development. And my part of the world, which is Central Asia, which consists of 5 former Soviet republics, so-called STAN countries, doing very well. If you have good economic growth, then you will be able to finance. This is my point. So we are in Central Asia really unique in sense of being able to provide stable economic growth. We are highly educated population and favorable demographic environment. This unique combination of the 3 factors is unique around the world. If you look to the numbers, last 20 years, average annual growth of Central Asia was 6.7% in the last 20 years. From 2000, our trade increased 9 times with outside world, and foreign direct investments increased 70 times. So we are in a growing curve and will be successful. Therefore, we will be able to finance green transition. Clear like that. We're in good geographical location. China, India, other countries around us, we're cooperating with them. We're only looking forward for our next success. But I would like to make 2 challenging or maybe provocative statements here in order to maybe to ignite some kind of discussions and issues which maybe go out of the box a little bit. Upon preparation of the conference, there was a perception that will Global South able to finance green transition? I want to turn things 180 degrees out. I ask everybody whether Global West, will be able to finance global transition. Why I'm telling this? Last week, in the NATO summit in The Hague, the commitment of 32 countries to spend 5% of GDP to military expenses is overwhelming, historical, and dramatic change. If everybody will meet 3.5% core target by 2030, it will total $13.4 trillion. If we put $1 banknotes on each other, and it will reach moon 4 times. Incredible. Where is this money coming from these 32 countries? This is a question, because European economy highly leveraged. So some should give in order to take. And if you look around, the most risky points of financing would be social and environmental needs. This is really something should be turned around. Global South in Asia will finance, and even more than we committed to do. So, okay, we have to find the sources, and that is why we're talking to Europeans. Please help us as well to meet targets to 2040, for example. I want to share you a very important observation, that we are in developing world, look to Europe as role model. right from the elementary school, we learn how Europe progressed to current status. We still want to see successful Europe. But what's happening is that if you look to the numbers, economic numbers, they are not very impressive. Last couple of years, growth is very small. GDP per capita dropping, unemployment is maybe a little bit better, but something happening here as well. And then the only way to Europe with high wages society to survive and compete is to go into innovative economy. And to be innovative economy successful, you must invest in education. Simple like that. There's no discovery, unique discovery, which I'm telling you about. But if you look to Europe, teachers going to the strikes. They ask for higher salaries. This is an incredible observation. I like, when I'm traveling to abroad, I always like to take taxi and to speak to the taxi drivers, because it's a unique way how you can get real information. And then when I was in Marseille, I was been driving with a man, a French man of Algerian, let's say, decency, with whom I had a short conversation, and he told me really an incredible story. He said that he gave his 2 children to the private school, not top private school, something like 1,000 euro per month. So I said, public school, what are you doing? He said, public school are not reliable. They're not giving to my kids knowledge. This is absolutely terrible. This is where we all should focus, and Europe should be continuing to focusing to be, for us, a role model. We are in Central Asia, have good demography, as I said. Everybody wants to study. When I was Prime Minister, I said to my cabinet, I only will be doing things with revenues. The expenses, all will go to education. Don't go into the spending appetite. Everything will be going into education. It's another challenge. And I wish that our conference will be really brainstorming at least 2 facts. First, will West be possible to finance green transition in a view of $13.4 trillion commitment? And if Europe will be able to finance innovation based on quality education. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. OTORBAEV, Mr. Prime Minister. Bon, double charge.
Bon, double charge by the Prime Minister of Kyrgyz Republic. He says he'd be provocative, and he was, so double charge. So 25% on defense from our GDP, and we can't even finance our education system. So what are we doing? So Mrs. the Minister of Ecological Transition, Agnès PANNIER-RUNACHER, how do we finance transition in the South? But the question is now sent to us, Agnès PANNIER-RUNACHER. So thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, what this demonstrates, it's not a question of money. Money is there. It circulates. What's lacking, it's the mobilization at the service of the fight against climate change and adaptation to climate change. So it's the courage of pulling out of our comfort zone and to fight against earnings of an economic world that's designed based on fossil fuels. As you demonstrate, the cost of climate urgency is known, it's enormous, and it's much larger than the cost of action. And I think the key word, and what was mentioned earlier, is investment. We need to stop looking at money invested in mitigation and adapting to climate change as a cost. It must be considered as an investment. There are the good investments that we should do and the bad investments. case on renewables. There are good investments on the renewables and there are bad investments on the renewables. And the challenge is to go from the billions to trillions. France is mobilized with the President of the Republic. It's mobilized on the agreement that was initially called the Paris Agreement for People and the Planet. So we transformed in an agreement for prosperity, the people and the planet. It was launched in 2023, and it's a roadmap that we co-designed with the countries of the South to sort of like get to a rupture of this question of financing. How we move from a budgetary finance of a reduced number of states, which are those who the usual financiers of the Paris Agreement, to a genuine mobilization of all financial sources towards the fight against climate change, with three pillars. The first is that we can't oppose the economic development and fighting against climate change, and so the money for development help should also accompany climate transition, and this money should also take into account the fact that developing countries have a debt, and we still need to lend money to them, and we can't stop at their results. Otherwise, they're blocked in their capacity to undergo their economic development and to fight along with us against climate change. The second pillar is, in fact, mobilizing all financial sources, the states, and of course, all those who can. It means that since 1990 or 92, where we established a list of usual financiers of the Paris Agreement, some economies have strongly developed, and now they can play a role. And today they should finance. The GDP per head of France is the 11th in the EU, and it's interesting to say that. And the third, and linked with this, it's also mobilized philanthropy, the corporations, banks, and the citizens. And third element is we have to really change the international financial system. We start doing that with the World Bank. But there again, the Bretton Woods institution need to be visited with a view to this challenge. And with due to this, there's a major challenge, is the cost, capital cost. In a country like Senegal and Pakistan, we finance with interest rates that are at 2-digit, where Germany is financed at 2%. In the most vulnerable country, the risk premium is sky high. So it means that the problems in investing strategies, infrastructure, investing in climate change, because there's this risk premium that blocks projects. So this challenge here is to manage to set a limit and remove the risk of these projects so that the best projects, wherever they may be on the planet, be financed. So we have to lift the cap. And the same idea, how do we broaden the basis of donors? And we try to find innovative tools. And Bertrand Madre's report is interesting on that aspect. So the prosperity agreement for the prosperity of people and the planet. And the idea is to accept that the world has changed, that the group of the 77 has been atomized. In this group of the 77, you have powerful countries, the BRICS or the basics, who need to take their responsibilities. And sometimes they're the spokespeople of the most vulnerable countries, but do not always defend the interests of these smaller countries. And innovative financing also, and think about taxing maritime transport, and this was agreed in Loni in April. I'm thinking of the promising work on aviation, on airlines. I'm thinking of a taxation on fossil energies used for comfort reasons. So we should hinder countries to have access to energy. I remind you that 800 million people on the earth don't have access to electricity. So let's start by providing electricity to them before anything else. And I'm thinking also of the carbon taxing mechanism that Europe is implementing. That can be an extremely powerful mechanism for the transformation of developing countries. And then there's the use of special drawing rights for the World Bank, and also reform development bank and bring together agendas. When we listen to developing countries, they don't see the color of money. It's too complicated. The banks are slow. They have the cold feet. Valuation of the risks is a problem. It penalizes the most fragile countries. When we contribute, I remember that France invests 6 billion euros each year in the climate finance. It's the second country in the world, the highest contributor. We're not the second richest country in the world. We're not the second country with the highest GDP per head. Now, we took our responsibility for this financing, and our feeling is the money doesn't reach the most vulnerable countries. So here again, solutions are well known. We have to implement it, capitalize more, mobilize the banks, simplify procedures, except to finance country strategies and not project by project, because every time we go over a cycle validating the projects and everything. Not only finance infrastructure, roads and dams, but finance local and participative transitions and solutions based on nature. The example of Costa Rica with the solutions based on nature is credit and biodiversity sheds a big light on everything, and the high ambition coalition for the people and the planet, and sometimes the results are underestimated but very promising. So as you see behind all this, the stake, the challenge is to recover trust between the north and southern countries and pull out of the idea that the countries of the north is a coherent ensemble. Ecology has become a geopolitical issue. Ecology raised the question of competition for rare resources like energy, water, food, and critical raw materials. And very clearly, we should know cooperation means opening up the way to conflicts. So there's no other option but to develop cooperations. Thank you, Mrs. Minister. So again, here talk about China and the participation of China. Maybe we'll be able to go back on that. We still have 15 minutes to go, so I'll hand over the floor to Mr. Hao Zhang from the IRB. We're on financial piping here. How can we finance a transition in the south? You have a lot of solutions were mentioned. Maybe you have others to talk about. Mr. Zhang.
Thank you, Alexandra. And it's my great pleasure to join the distinguished the panelists. I came from the Bank for International Settlement, BIS. This is the international organization with the longest history, with headquarters in Basel, Switzerland, just not far away from the French border. As the panelists just elaborate, you can see that the question today is no longer whether we need to finance the transitions, whether it is from the south or from the west or from the north. We have to finance it. But as Minister just said, it is how we can do it. How we can do it credibly, inclusively, and effectively. So my remarks is just follow up on what they just said with the panel, that the appeal is for the financial sectors around the world. How to align the capital with climate goals. I have 2 points for the sake of the time. One is we have to be encouraging ourselves a little bit. The green finance has made progress. Disclosure standards have improved. More investors are incorporating climate risk into their strategies. So that's a piece of fact. So we should congratulate ourselves a little bit. And to give you the number, global green bond issuance rose from $500 billion in 2018 to $3 trillion by the end of 2024. So we do have the process on the way from billions of dollars to $1 trillion. And I'll give you another example, based on the recent studies by the BIS, which show that the green bond issuance signaled improved corporate environmental performances, in that the issuers reducing the carbon emissions by over 10% with 4 years of issuance. That's one. And number two, and the green bond serves as the catalyst for tangible changes in corporate behavior, with firms improving carbon efficiencies and reducing emission intensities by nearly 30% following the issuance. This 30% reduction actually surpassing the broader market average. So you see, there is a progress. But as we see it, it's not enough. Just as Helene just pointed out that there's a huge gap between the demand and the supply. But indeed, as Minister just said, the money is there. How to make the two match more? So that's the task now. I believe we can do more, we can do better. But how? Here I come to the idea that we should move from green finance to transition finance. What do I mean by that? The green finance as we know it, we mobilize resources to finance green projects. And each of the green projects, they have their own conditions, criterions, which means as long as you meet a carbon emission standard or threshold, then it's a green project. But, you know, the investor is looking for return as well. And it is very hard to find, you know, with the sufficient returns. At the same time, you have a very, very high standard for green emissions. At the same time, there's plenty of the project which you can work on to reduce the carbon emissions from dark to brown to green. So there are two sort of ideas. One is, it is a process. We need to finance those projects with the trajectories towards green. I mean, in a sense, we're not only target about green project, we also target about greener project. That's one. Second, we should target on not just individual project, but we target on the system. So there is a systematic view towards transition. What do I mean by that? Which means if you look at the individual project, they may not pass through the sustainability test. But if you add them up, they may generate the joint result of green and carbon emissions. There's plenty of the examples, and in Asia, in India, in China, it's already a project like that. So if I have time, I will be happy to come back to elaborate on the project itself. But here, I just call for more emphasis on transition finance. And then here, the green bond or transition bond or sustainability bond, whatever you call it, will be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bien, alors, il nous reste 8 minutes. Est-ce que...
So we have 8 minutes left. I know what I'm going to do. Are there any questions in the room? So take a microphone. We're going to take 2 questions from the floor, and then we're going to let the speakers answer. 3 questions, short questions, please. And hello, Christine Alzabar, I'm a journalist. I represent Financial Africa. I don't see any Africans in this panel. There should have been an African, if that's the question. They were obliged to cancel. No, not at all. This is a question for the former president of Costa Rica. What you described in your country is very serious. With regard to the solutions that you found, are there any that would work for Africa that might be going down the same road as Costa Rica? Next question. We take first question, does Costa Rica have any ideas for Africa? Second question.
I work in private equity.
Welcome.
It would be very interesting to get your take, probably from all the four. When we finance transitions in the Global South, we usually tend to do that with a debt-structured way. Doesn't that raise an ethical question in the sense that it's more pressure on those developing countries who actually are hurting from a cash flow perspective, more fiscal pressure, more cash flow pressure? I see there's an ethical aspect here, and I would love to have your take on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur, la dernière.
Fernando Morales de la Cruz. I'm a journalist. I was born in Guatemala. And, you know, when one talks about billions in development aid, one's talking about a little bit more than 200 billion. But when one really analyzes how many trillions it would take to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, we are talking about probably 8 trillion per year for 10 years. So the problem is that we are not talking about the 2,000 corporations that actually represent 45 trillion per year. And so if we want to talk about any transition in any aspect, whether it's energy or protecting the environment or the economy, we must consider the negative impact of the top 2,000 corporations.
So what can corporations do for the transitions in the South, right?
Well, the business model of the corporations in many cases is the opposite of the Sustainable Development Goals. And as the president of Costa Rica knows, less than 3 cents per cup of coffee go back to Costa Rica. Less than 3 cents per cup.
Thank you. Okay, so we have 3 questions. Maybe one about the corporations. Ideas from Costa Rica for Africa, ideas about corporations, and the questions from Usama from Morocco about finance. Agnès Pannier-Runacher, please wave at me. I don't know if you want to intervene. Agnès Pannier-Runacher.
Maybe en français ou en anglais? En français, la question était en français.
So the question was in French on Africa. So the answers in particular are de-risking of projects. How can we support Africa? Well, we need to create real packages according to country strategies. And that's what you said when you said we need to fund complete strategies and not just project by project, because some projects are only worthwhile because they're linked to an ecosystem or an organic system, firstly. Secondly, we must de-risk, so lower the risk premium that is paid. Public-private financing. And there are 2 tools that I haven't talked about, and these are biodiversity, high-integrity biodiversity credits, which are an initiative that we took with the United Kingdom. And so it's the minister that is negotiating for climate, biodiversity and pollution, who, in the name of France, who is speaking to you. And the initiative of high-integrity biodiversity credit is today unrolling projects, pilot projects, to see how it works and if it's to our advantage to speed up these funding.
And credit 6.
I'm very surprised that the NGOs consider that this is a renouncement. No, this has been at the heart of the Paris Agreement since 2015. And this is the opportunity of creating strategic partnerships with the most vulnerable countries and to pull out of this totally fictive argumentation of the group of the countries of the North and the group of the countries of the South, because we're a group of different countries, actually. And the trajectory or the funding capacity as France are much lower than many other countries of the North. Nevertheless, I make more efforts than other countries. So it's not the right approach. The right approach is how altogether can we go and find projects that I'm thinking of RDC. There's a demographic question in RDC. The best way to respond to RDC is education, and education of girls in particular. It's nothing to do with the climate, and it will no doubt be the most efficient way to contain greenhouse gas emissions of the RDC and to prevent its carbon footprint from going through the roof. Tao.
Oh, okay, thank you. I just want to address the questions raised by the private equity. You know, the BIS has launched the so-called the Green Bond Fund about 6 or 5 years ago. And right now, the size is already cumulatively reached to almost $7 billion US. So it's with the high qualities and criteria. But the point I want to appeal to private sector like you is that pay attention to this fund and pay attention to the fund which is looking for investments which with a hybrid with renewable energy project and the traditional coal or fuel-based project which altogether generated the systematic reductions of carbon emissions. Just a little bit more. You know, renewable energies, as we see it, suffer from the high intermediates. And as we said it, 30% renewable energies suffer from that. On the other hand, the coal or fuel-based power plants, they also suffered from slow start and high requirement for working load. But if you reduce the working load of the traditional project, then it suffered from the carbon emission intensities. But at the same time, you reduce the number of the operations, which reduce the total emission of the project. So if you have a syndicated loans for consist of 2 kind of project, then that will achieve both the project objectives of sustainability and the financial returns. So this is a clear examples in China, India, Indonesia. These are plenty of the opportunities over there if you're looking for opportunities. So I appeal to all the private sector here to look for that, because the coal mining power plant, these are the heavy emitters, heavy sectors which we should work on. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. President Alvarado, Mr. Prime Minister OTORBAEV, I'd like to, even for maybe a word of conclusion, I'd like to listen to you, please. Maybe about corporations,
Hello.
I don't know.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the question. I do believe it's an experience and could be offered as an example for reference. But I do believe that every country, either from east and west, north and south, should find their own developmental pathways and agencies. Let me put you another example. Costa Rica abolished the army. We have no armed forces since 1948. And I do believe that's our way of doing things. We don't have tanks, we don't have artillery. We try not to be a menace for nobody. But we don't go telling everybody that that's the way to go. We just offer that as our way to go. And I think that's the way the world works. If we want our liberty to be respected, then we need to respect others' ways. But we put our ideas in the market of ideas. So hopefully also it triggers change from within people. I close with that. Where do I put hope today? Today I put hope within myself, and knowing that tomorrow there's going to be another day and I can work another day towards the things I believe. I'm not putting hope on politicians doing things I don't agree on. I put hope of what I can do about the future. And I think there's the hope for that's why I'm hopeful, because I know today, tomorrow, and the day after, I can do the things I believe are the positive for my son, for the planet, and for the people I love.
Prime Minister OTORBAEV, you started with the provocative assertions.
No, a short answer to green finance is that we need to have economic growth. No economic growth, no green finance, nothing can happen. And distribution of revenues, I would say, let's take example of Costa Rica. I just mentioned the 13.4 trillion which will go for arms. And what to do with this? Actually, I want to finish my statement with this famous Franz Kafka statement. He said, all talks are meaningless if there is a lack of trust. So let's build trust in events like that among everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to the audience. Merci à vous tous. Thank you so much.